This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflections and hope for progress in education. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
It gives me great pleasure to invite Dr. Kemi Jona to talk to me today about reimagining higher education. Kemi, you've had a remarkable career, both as an educator, a researcher, and a leader in a variety of institutions. And you seem to like institutions that have some sort of geographical location, like in Northeastern. I'm just wondering when you're going to go down to Southwestern. Tell us about you and your career, and starting off with your undergraduate career.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Judith. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your listeners. Um, I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and went to undergrad at our state flagship, University of Wisconsin-Madison, along with the majority of my high school friends and graduates. It was much, much easier to get into Madison back when I went. I think you just had to be in the top half of your high school class to get in, and that obviously is no longer anywhere near true. Um, but one of the things I carried with me from the time there is um, how Madison, the University of Wisconsin, really embodied that public higher education mission. And one of the goals that I'd always had throughout my career is to try to get back into public higher education, which I finally was able to do here at University of Virginia. I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but many fond memories of being an undergraduate at Wisconsin. The winters are not that fun, but the summers are beautiful, and it's really a terrific university town.
And are there any teachers that you had, or any sort of formative experiences that you had at Madison as a young student that really was the foundation of you then as a grad student and then as an education leader?
Yeah, I was very interested. It's weird to say this now because it seems passé, but I was very interested in artificial intelligence even back then in the early 80s, having watched movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey and other sci-fi movies, and had been very involved in early computers in high school with the Apple introduction of the Apple. So there was no AI major back in my day, so I had to sort of cobble it together with a double major in computer science and cognitive psychology. And so some of my formative experiences, again, some of your readers will smile in recognition, but we had to trudge to the basement of the computer science building to actually do our work because nobody had laptops yet. And you could only get on the computers in the basement at like midnight or 2 a.m. because there weren't that very many of them. And so trudging through, the 20 below zero snow in Madison, Wisconsin to do your computer homework is definitely a burned in memory of my undergraduate experience. But I would say, the other side is as a psychology major, I was able and had the good fortune to have a senior honors thesis advisor, Dr. Art Glenberg, who invited me in as an undergraduate to be a research assistant in his lab and really introduced me to what science looked like firsthand, right? Running subjects, analyzing data, writing up your paper. That was really my first experience, and I owe a lot to Dr. Glenberg and sort of showing me what the model of a academic researcher with integrity really meant.
So it was both curiosity and a really sort of a moral framework that was the basis for your undergraduate education that you then took onto your postgraduate work?
Yeah, it was also, I would say, too, like just the excitement of being at the very early stages of the field of AI, right? And computing and computer science generally, right? This was, these again, nobody had laptops. I mean, it's hard to imagine if we say that today, right? The faculty, I remember my first undergraduate job was working in the lab helping faculty who ordered the very first desktops to be installed on their desks in their offices versus having to walk to the computer science building. So that was the moment where like these personal computing devices, right, machines really first became a thing, and we first had email. And I mean, it makes me sound pretty old right now, but those were exciting days because this was really game-changing technology. Both just in terms of communication with email. I would, email my high school friend who was at MIT, and we didn't have to pay $1 or $2 a minute to AT&T for long distance calls. We thought we were like the coolest things on the planet. But even for faculty, writing papers, analyzing data, this was a game-changing set of technology. So it was just really exciting to be in on the ground floor of that, and that really ignited my passion to continue on into graduate school, and to be sort of trying to build intelligent machines, just like we saw in the movies.
So when you think back to those years, and now armed with hindsight and the experience of the development of the whole field, both the technical development, the epistemological development, what are the great insights that you had that were the foundations then that you now have now, that you have now? And if you did it again, what would you do differently, given, the benefit of hindsight?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that was really eye-opening to me as a young grad student at Yale, who, and again, spent years sort of trying to figure out how do we actually build artificially intelligent, software, is that, I can't remember who uh, the quote was from, but basically, artificial intelligence is anything that we don't know how to program a computer to do. Because the minute you figure out how to program a computer to do it, it doesn't seem that intelligent anymore. It just seems like computer programming. And I remember my first year in grad school at Yale was like, wow, I just made this program do something really smart, but it doesn't seem like AI anymore. It just seems like mundane. So
Mm-hmm.
that was sort of something that stuck with me, which is even now, it's sort of like, we mystify what AI is, but the folks who are building it often feel like it's a fairly mundane technology, once you figured out how to make a machine do that. And I think the other insight that I got later on in graduate school, as I reflect back, is the framing of the work that we do, not just as a purely technical solution, a piece of software or system, but as a socio-technical solution, one that involves both humans, either individually or in groups, or as a larger society, and the technology, right? And to pull back to that lens of analysis, which is you can't just drop a new piece of technology in and just assume it's going to work as you intended it to, right? Which now we no surprise, um, but to always consider the human factors and how it's going to impact how humans interact with each other, how they interact with the technology, and how those are going to change once you perturb the system.
So you spent your time in as a senior administrator, senior leader in two quite different universities. Virginia, quite traditional. Look at the architecture behind you, that neoclassical architecture. Then Northeastern, a different kind of university. For an Australian audience, what tell us about those two universities and what roles that you played and how you made a difference in terms of your contribution to the field of AI and really learning and teaching through technology and with technology.
Yeah, it's a great question, and they do represent very different kinds of institutions. So I think it is instructive to kind of think through them. So Northeastern, where I was for 7 years before coming to the University of Virginia, um, I was assistant vice chancellor for digital innovation and enterprise learning, and also worked when I first joined as associate dean for our working adult bachelor completion portfolio, right? So median age was 34, single moms, other folks who, for whatever reason, never finished their degree and were coming back primarily online to complete. And so that was really an energizing exposure to, how to make higher ed accessible to these post-traditional audiences, right? Not the 18-year-old on campus. But Northeastern was exciting because it was really a university on the move, right? It had, under the leadership of President Joseph Aoun, had really aspired to move up the rankings and become really a top 50 national U.S. university, from a history of being really the blue collar commuter school of Boston, right? I mean, anybody who knows Boston knows there's no shortage of very, very well known, high quality institutions. In fact, you can't walk across the street without bumping into another couple of them. And Northeastern historically, many, many decades ago, was the place that, working Bostonians sent their children when they couldn't afford to go across the Charles River to Tufts or Harvard or MIT. And that's where the co-op program that Northeastern is so well known for got its origin. Was literally students would work for 6 months, save the money, and pay tuition for the next semester, and they would do it over and over again. Essentially, what we would call a working adult student these days. And over time, aspire to become a much more highly ranked university, and still had that deep DNA around employer partnerships, right? Thousands of employer partners who hosted students for paid co-ops. And that really infused the culture there, one of both innovation of, hey, if we're going to be a top 50 university, we really have to do new things. We have to try new things. We can't just rest on our laurels, as it were, right? And also that there's working with employers is not a dirty word, right? It's not something to be shunned or looked down upon, but really is core to the identity of the university. And that really, for me, opened up the opportunity to think much more deeply and differently about ways that a university could partner productively in new ways with employers to kind of bridge that gap. So that was a really exciting role for me. And we can talk more about some of the innovative partnerships that I was able to forge there, but really showed me what was possible when you had an institution that was really truly willing to meet employers in the middle at the table and sort out, how might we do it better together if we really, brought the innovation forward and brought a spirit of collaboration forward. University of Virginia, as you pointed out, is kind of at the opposite end of that spectrum. Obviously, a storied institution founded by Thomas Jefferson, deeply committed to the idea that education is essential for democracy and democratic flourishing, and much more of what we would all call a traditional residential university. Very elite, but also public. And so in that sense, obligated to serve the citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia that pay taxes and support the university. And also one that has deep roots in sending students into public service roles, right? So there's a deep an abiding passion for students who want to live a life of service, whether that be in government service, not-for-profit, military, et cetera, right? So very different, and also very decentralized here, right? As opposed to Northeastern, which was a very top-down directed organization. Here, the deans of the individual schools have a lot more discretion and say over what they'd like to do than Central.
Can I pick up on that notion of employability that you referred to earlier, and particularly the idea of service learning and partnerships. That's now part of government policy in Australia too, that graduates are expected to get jobs. And that's sort of employability, giving the opportunities to learn through work and learn by working, but at the same time, making sure that they've got time on campus. What are the characteristics of programs? Because you've also written about this. I've read a couple of things yesterday that you'd written. So if you were giving advice to people who were wanting to create a new employability program, setting up effective partnerships, what advice would you give them to make sure that it met the expectations and requirements of the university and the state, but at the same time met the requirements and expectations of the employers and the community?
Yeah, I mean that is the $64,000 question. So I appreciate the question. Um, my experience is that there's been a lot of finger pointing on both sides, Judith, right? That employers historically, rightly or wrongly, have pointed the finger at higher ed for not producing graduates with appropriate skills or attitudes or whatnot. Um, and, higher ed has often sort of pointed at employers and accused them of not knowing what they want or not valuing the skills that the students actually have, a variety of things, right? On and on. Changing their minds too quickly, and obviously higher ed being accused of not moving fast enough. All the things that we've all heard time and again. And in my experience, meeting in the middle and expressing a willingness to engage in co-design of truly saying like, look, we know that we both value employability outcomes, right? Not maybe as the only thing we care about, but as something that from a higher ed perspective, students and parents absolutely, as you said, regardless of the country, look to higher ed to improve, obviously not guarantee, but improve the employability of the students who go there and pay tuition of and whatnot. And employers also have quite honestly a big stake in this, which is, they would prefer not to have to bear the cost of training new employees, and will, often fight very hard to not do that. And would like, the education system, however it's funded, to take the lion's share of the burden of preparing, especially young people, but really people of any age, to contribute value to that company. So there is shared ground upon which to build a productive partnership if people are willing to put aside kind of preconceived notions and meet in the middle and truly co-design. That being said, obviously, you hinted at this idea of academic rigor, of which universities obviously have a deep stake in preserving. But I haven't yet met an employer who really is pushing a university partner to water down the rigor, right? They want employees, especially new hires, to really have those skills that often take a long time to develop, right? I mean, whether it's computer science, you can't learn that in 2 weeks, right? I'm sorry, right? You just can't. And then the enduring human skills that we keep hearing about time and again, right? Communication, teamwork, leadership, collaboration, critical thinking. You can't develop those in 2 weeks either, right? They all take deep investment over often months and years to truly develop. It's clear that the university experience can, when thoughtfully designed, produce people with those desirable skills. And so I think the advice I would give is come in with an open mind, prepare to be more flexible than you have been in the past. Recognize that employers do not care about your departmental structures. They do not care about your school divisions or your disciplinary boundaries. And you should not try to make them align to your boundaries. They also don't care about your semester timelines quite as much as you do. And trying to find ways to be sort of flexible and meet in the middle on both of those while each side upholds, the standards, I think can be a really productive kind of conversation. One example I'll give just to finish up that we did at Northeastern was a partnership with GE Aviation, the company that makes the jet engines that go on most Boeing airplanes and others. And we co-designed a bachelor's in advanced manufacturing systems for the folks who actually built those jet engines who, maybe they went to community college, a 2-year school, that never got a chance to complete their bachelor's degree and would like to obviously kind of move up and complete that. And, we had a lot of concern initially along the lines of what you were suggesting, which is academic integrity, other sorts of things. But guess what? GE Aviation does not want employees who do not make the best, highest quality, and safest jet engines, nor do any of us want to fly on a plane with people who made a jet engine who do not uphold the highest levels of training and expertise, right? And so, I mentioned that just as an example of where there's much more alignment on academic rigor and academic integrity than you would normally think, because we all have a stake in high quality outcomes when we're talking about jet engines.
So what I'm hearing you saying is there's a real imperative for each partner to understand and know each other's business. How do you do that?
It takes a lot of listening. In my experience, the kind of partnerships that we built often took a year of talking and listening, and then about a year-ish of building and launching, right? So you're talking about a 2-year process, which in the corporate world is often an eternity. In higher ed, not the worst thing in the world because we move pretty slow. But the leaders at the university have to understand that this isn't going to be an immediate quick fix that you could turn around and start up in a couple of months, right? It does take that deep commitment that we were just talking about to kind of hash it out and find the common ground. And another example of one we built together at Northeastern was with PwC, PricewaterhouseCooper, a well-known international firm, to create a master's in accounting to help them recruit and attract young accounting talent, which is in short supply these days. And when we worked together on it, we found out that actually the accounting curriculum was out of date relative to what accounting looked like in the 21st century. And we were able to productively update our own curriculum to make it sort of job relevant to, the folks who are actually doing that job today versus say 30 or 40 years ago when the curriculum was first designed. And so we got a lot out of it too on the university side, even though it did take us, some course redesign efforts and whatnot. And we did expect the corporate partner to stand by their commitment to supply, a steady stream of enrollments that would allow us to, amortize our upfront investment costs. And it does take, as I said, a year's worth plus of work. We can't just have that thrown away at a moment's notice. So we needed, deep commitment on both sides to stick with the partnership and really make it work and understand it's not going to go perfect the first semester, and we're going to learn how to adjust it. Like, for example, with the accounting, we all know here in the US that from January to April, accountants don't have time to do anything else because it's tax season for the April 15th deadline. And so, we were able to accommodate that by saying, well, we'll just, reduce or eliminate a lot of the coursework during that busy period and shift it to other parts of the year so that we don't overwhelm the students who are trying to, work 80, 100-hour weeks while completing schoolwork on top of it would have been, an unreasonable expectation. So those are just the kinds of flexible moments that have to come up, and you just have to work your way through them one at a time.
So we started our conversation talking about your early experience in AI in its very nascent stage. Where does AI now fit in higher education, and how can it be optimized? But what are the things that we need to be wary of?
That really is the question of the decade, I think, for higher ed, Judith. So deep appreciation to you for foregrounding what I think is our most existential question. You know, AI, not that this was ever the original intent, but has ended up really calling into question the kinds of artifacts that educators have long used as signals of thinking, right? A paper, an essay, an exam, even a computer program, right? Often was seen as, that artifact was representative of student thought and student effort. And that equation has been broken in many instances now by generative AI and is really calling on all of us in education, including K-12, to be honest, in primary and secondary levels as well, but certainly higher ed especially, to really fundamentally re-examine what our practices are and whether we have really strayed from our core mission of um, asking our students to think deeply and then express that thought and learning in authentic and meaningful forms, right? And this isn't just about, catching cheaters, because that's really, frankly, pretty uninteresting and pointless. I think what it does, Judith, is it calls us back to the core point around student engagement and student motivation, and to really take those much more seriously as kind of a foundation of igniting passion for learning, for lifelong learning, understanding how to be a critical thinker, all the things that really have long been at the core and central to higher education. We may have stopped talking about them for a long time because we talked about employability, but I think every educator at some level is deeply passionate about students acquiring those critical thinking abilities in their discipline, and we now have to have a conversation about what does that actually look like in the era of AI. And quite honestly, I think it's going to involve a new social compact between students and faculty and the university, around why are you here? Like, why are you paying tuition to come to university or go to any school? Again, this applies to secondary school as well. The analogy that I've often used to kind of explain that is, it would be as if you paid a lot of money to join a very expensive gym membership, and then you sent your roommate to work out for you. And no student, 18-year-old or 25-year-old or 40-year-old, would have any illusion that that was not a way to get in shape, right? That you can't just pay an expensive gym membership and send your roommate to go do your exercise, because you're not going to get in shape. You will not accrue the benefits of working out. If you're an athlete, then of course you're not going to get stronger or faster. And also that when you do go to the gym, you have to push yourself. You can't just sort of phone it in, if you will, and take it easy. You got to really push yourself hard if you want to get stronger. And that has to form the basis, I think, of a new social compact for teaching and learning, right? Is, look, yeah, you could fake your way through this if you wanted to with AI, and we could try to catch you, but that probably won't be successful most of the time. But neither of us want to waste our time trying to catch you to do that. What we want to do is we want to help you get stronger or faster, in a cognitive way, right? In a skills way, just like the football coach or the soccer coach or the swimming coach wants to help you be a better athlete. And that's going to rely on you being motivated to do the work. And I think we've lost our way on that conversation in many parts of higher ed. And I think we're going to have to get back to it. Otherwise, I'm not sure what the path forward will look like.
Does that then mean a redefinition of the purpose of higher education?
I don't know if it means a redefinition. I mean, it definitely means a rethinking or a recentering
Hmm.
of what that means, because the performative elements no longer hold water. And I think everybody sees that now. The employers see it, faculty see it, students see it, everybody sees it. The emperor has no clothes. And so the question is, how do we get back to what the core of that experience is supposed to be like, which is really putting in the work and developing those critical thinking abilities in whatever discipline. Could be artistic too. That's fine. Um, um, and um, Doubling down really on those core value propositions rather than just sort of assuming that it would happen by accident through just going through the hoops that we've put out, whether it's a paper or an exam or whatever, a multiple choice test, whatever you call it. I think that's what we have to do is sort of recenter ourselves on those core values. And I think employers and society are essentially expecting us to do that, right? And I think it's an opportunity. Certainly it's a threat for higher ed if we
Hmm.
ignore it, but I think it's a real opportunity to reestablish the value proposition that always was part of higher ed's promise, right? As to really develop uh, students and critical thinking abilities and skills in a rigorous way, right? With passionate educators who are deeply knowledgeable about their fields. That really is, I think, the opportunity that we all have as educators and leaders in higher ed is to try to guide our institutions through this current moment and to reclaim and reestablish that core value of what it means to really develop people's ability to think and communicate and to collaborate.
And then how to measure it. So assessment really is probably the foundation of this, of revisiting what are we assessing, how are we assessing, and why are we assessing.
I think that's right. And I think we've skated by with some less rigorous answers to those questions for a long time because we could. It was hard to fake some of them, and now it's not hard to fake a lot of those. And so, as we said earlier, it is going to take a revisiting around instructional design and assessment design to really do those things in authentic ways. Because again, if we lose the student engagement, they're going to be right back to why do I have to learn this? I don't understand the relevance, right? And so we can't fall back on our sort of authority, if you will, of trust us. This is going to be, eat your vegetables. This is going to be good for you. I think it's incumbent upon us to really demonstrate that value proposition in a changing world, right? In a changing labor market.
Well, talking about a changing world, higher education in America is getting a lot of visibility internationally for both good reasons and bad reasons. Good reasons, producing Nobel Prize winners who actually deserve the award. Bad reasons because of the politicization of both policies and practices. What are the three big challenges that you see from where you are in Virginia facing higher education in the US that we should take note of outside of the US?
That's a great question. I mean, I think the one that is most universal, right, is the question around employability outcomes, which again remains probably similar across many countries. Um, it's indisputable that the labor market is changing dramatically. Um, there are arguments about whether it's macroeconomic forces right now. We're speaking, on December 16th, where they've just released some updated unemployment figures here in the United States, which paints a pretty grim picture of the economy, um, most of which has nothing to do with AI, right? So I think we need to be clear-eyed that we don't fall prey to the hype that's, well, AI is changing everything. But there's a lot of other factors around employment that have nothing to do with it that are changing. But nonetheless, higher ed is always on the hook if employability outcomes for new graduates are poor. They were poor during the Great Recession, had nothing to do with AI. But people still ask, well, is college worth it? Is my tuition worth it? And those questions will remain, I think, forever. So employability, I think, is a universal concern, and we have to take that seriously. Maybe not as the only thing we care about, but certainly something that our students and their parents care about. I think the second one that I would put up there is lack of public confidence in the research mission of universities. We've, since the end of World War II, so the last 80 years here in the United States, have had a grand bargain between government funding for basic research that the universities have conducted essentially on behalf of the government with their funding, but we were the ones ultimately, spinning up the labs and doing the work, and I think it's pretty indisputable that bargain created, an incredible economic power that is the United States economy, and similarly in other countries that the model was emulated. And I think for 80 years, we in higher ed and the research community took for granted that was an understood good deal for the government and for society. And we've somehow lost that narrative. And I think the public no longer is as sure as they might have been in the past of why it's worth having universities conduct basic research that might not pay off for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, right? I mean, people forget that the internet was funded in that way and founded in that way, and the World Wide Web and GPS and the cell phone. I mean, you can just go down the list, right? Not to mention, cancer treatments and all the other, health and life-saving therapies. So we have to revisit and reinvest in our public's understanding of the value of research that the universities do on behalf of society. And then third, I think here in the United States, since January of 2025, there has been pullback in the government's willingness to fund student loans, particularly now at the graduate level, but there's been caps at all levels. And that is going to really upend, I think, in 2026 and beyond, the financing of how students consider, financing their education. And we're going to have to come up with some alternative solutions that are not federal student loan financing. So, taken together, the employability risks or concerns, the breaking of that public belief in the value of basic research, and the retrenchment of government funding for education, higher education in particular, taken together is sort of a perfect storm here in the United States and to some extent elsewhere, but especially here in the US around, recommunicating our value proposition and trying to rally the public back to our side around why this is something that's really good for society, whether you go to college or whether you don't.
I mean, this has been a wonderful discussion, and I usually end the conversation with the question, what are you reading at the moment, and what are you going to read over the holiday period?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's been a really enjoyable conversation. The book I'm reading right now, actually, I strongly recommend it to all my higher ed colleagues and peers, is a book called Hacking College by Ned Laff, Laff, and Scott Carlson. And what it talks about is some of the themes we talked about earlier, Judyth, which is how do students find their way through a college major and electives and building their sort of schedules in a way that aligns with what they're interested in, what they're passionate about, even if it doesn't align with a biology major or a psychology major, or for in my case, a computer science major, which is usually the most clear-cut linkage between a major and a career. And it has some really great advice both for students, but also their advisors, people who advise them in student affairs, and faculty on how to guide students in finding their passions and navigating the Byzantine world of college majors.
Now that's a serious book. What about a less serious book that you plan to read over the break?
The less serious book. I mean, the sad news is that I have a whole bookshelf full of books around how AI is going to disrupt our economy. So I don't think that those are quite the ones you're talking about, but I'll try to riffle through my bookcase and see if I can find some fiction that's more lighthearted.
Look, Kemi, I am so delighted to have had this conversation. Thank you for your time, and I've had a great time this morning. My time talking to you, and I wish that 2026 is one of prosperity, safety, and fulfillment.
Thank you, Judith, to you as well, and to all your listeners.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practices in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.